Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur who's founded and led 2 8-figure companies. I'm also an investor, author, speaker, and lifetime learner. On this podcast, I explore stories of success in every episode and with every guest. What it means, why it's important, and of course, how it happens. You can subscribe, connect, and learn more about me at MikeMalatesta.com. Before we start today's episode, I wanted to tell you about 2 quick things. First, thanks to you, this podcast is in the top 2.5% of all podcasts in the world. My goal is to earn my way into the top 1% group. You can help me with this by sharing episodes and leaving reviews. Second, my new book is going to launch on November 30th, 2021. It's called Ownership. The subtitle is How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. I'll let you know more about how you can get it as we get closer to launch. Hey everybody, welcome back to the How Did It Happen podcast. This is Mike Malatesta, your host. Thank you for joining me today. And you're in for a surprise and a really, really great story because today I've got Joe Foster on the podcast. And Joe is the co-founder of Reebok, a little company that makes shoes that you may have heard of. Joe started the business with his brother, Jeff, in England in 1958. And in 1980, so after 20-some years in business, Reebok took off, and it became a multi-million-dollar company, then a billion-dollar company, then a multi-billion-dollar company. And Joe's going to tell you how that happened, and he's going to take you through his journey with it. And he's also going to talk to you about his book, which you should get. It's called Shoemaker, Reebok and the Untold Story of a Lancashire Family Who Changed the World. And now, please help me welcome Joe Foster. Joe Foster, welcome to the podcast.
Mike, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's taken us a while to get this set up. So I've been reading about and I've been thinking about, bringing this amazing story to my audience, and I'm just so excited to have you here. Joe, I start every one of my shows with the same simple question. How did it happen for you?
How did it happen for me? Well, I guess it's a family business. That's the way it happened for me. I guess we need to go really back to my grandfather, which is 1895. That's a long time. That's 125 years ago and counting. So how it happened for me, 2 world wars, and how can I say, the second generation of the family, my father and uncle, who just really didn't get the message. Now, maybe that 2 world wars did something to them that meant that they were not looking at the business. But the business my grandfather built was incredible. So what happened to me is that with my brother, we saw we needed to change, we needed to move. And my grandfather's business wasn't moving. It was a fabulous business. But his sons, my father and uncle, didn't take it where they should have taken it. So what happened? That happened for me and Jeff, and we left the company in 1958 to set up our own brand, Mercury Sports Footwear.
And what was it like working with your dad and your uncle? You said that they didn't get the message. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I take it that means that they didn't do what with the business the legacy. They didn't maintain the legacy that your grandfather had established with it. What exactly does that mean, and how was it for you and your brother to be working with them?
Well, my grandfather died in 1933, and I wasn't born until 1935, but I happened to be born on his birthday, the 18th of May. So my grandmother was most insistent that I brought my name with me. So he was Joe Foster, and I am Joe Foster. So I never knew my grandfather and really didn't know that much about him. And we didn't know that much about him until really, Jeff and myself, in a business. I only spent 12 months. I was 17 when I started. I had been to college for engineering. And at 18, both Jeff and myself, we had to leave the company to do national service. So we did 2 years doing national service. And, that takes you away from family life. Yeah, mother is no longer doing your washing, preparing your meals, doing the things that you normally expect. You've got to become self-sufficient, which you do when you learn discipline, real discipline. So becoming self-sufficient, learning the disciplines, we come back to a family business and we look at it and it's not working, it's not functioning. My father and uncle, they just didn't get on. In fact, they feuded most of the time. We've heard of Adidas and Rudy Dassler, and they never got on. They fought. But Rudy left the company and set up his own. He set up Boomer. With the Foster family, they didn't. They just kept fighting. That was no good for the business. We tried. We tried to talk to father and say, look, you've got to get together. This business needs to grow. It needs to look around. Jeff, he did his national service in Germany, and he saw Puma, he saw Adidas, and he saw the difference in the companies. So coming back and looking at our family business and seeing that they weren't taking in the message, and they didn't take the message in from Jeff and myself. It took us 3 years, but we did things. We went to college. We learned a bit more about shoemaking, and then we left the company. We had to. So it's you think, what happened? Why didn't your parents, or why didn't your father and uncle? Why didn't they get on? And one thing that was probably a big lesson, because when Jeff and I left the company, brothers, we did get on, and we got on well. We never had a crossword. Unfortunately, Jeff died just before the business took off in America. We just got to America. But up until that time, we never had a crossword.
And when you and Jeff were trying to, I guess, talk to your father and your uncle, but were they kind of getting where you were coming from, but they just couldn't make it work between the two, Joe? Or was it just like they were like, you guys don't know what you're talking about, we know we got it under control? What was the dynamic like?
I think when we talk about the dynamic, it was just so frustrating. They didn't speak to each other. They had separate bookkeeping. So
Okay.
Father had one side of the business, uncle had the hand sewn, the other side of the business, the classical side of the business, but they did not speak to each other. I would say to my father, look, we've got to do something different. Why don't we set up a separate company? And all my father could say, look, when Bill's gone and I'm gone, this is your business. You can do what you like with it. And all I'm saying, look, Dad, number one, we don't want you to go. Number two, the business will have gone long before you have, because it's dying on its feet. Didn't make any difference. I think they'd lost the spirit. Maybe going through 2 world wars and coming out the other end, maybe they hadn't got that same drive that you needed in a business. Maybe they never had, or maybe it was the 2 world wars and the gap. I think there were about 6 years difference between them in age, my father and uncle. Maybe these I never really knew at all, what caused it. I don't know. And I think probably the same with Adi Dassler and Rudy Dassler. Who knew why they didn't get on at all? Who knew why that didn't work? But it didn't.
Yeah, and sometimes you see that between two people, they're feuding or they can't get along, and even they don't know why. They've forgotten the reason that it first started. And they continue it just out of inertia or habit or whatever. And when you sit them down and you ask them about it, they go, you know what? I'm actually not sure why we don't like each other.
Exactly. And the only thing that kept them together was grandmother. Grandmother, she lived on the premises. She was there, and she kept them together. It was when she died, that's when it really fell apart. And she died shortly after Jeff and I came back from being from doing national service, and we just saw it deteriorate then. But again, she wasn't the person driving the company. What she was doing is keeping them working together.
Right.
There was nobody driving the company.
And what was it like with your dad, your uncle, after you and your brother left, Joe? Was it okay with them, or was it, what was the?
Well, I never saw my uncle again. I think it was about 2 years, nearly 3 years after we left, he died. And so my father had the business, but again, the J.W. Foster business had been dying and there was nothing really that could save it. So he closed the business and we just amalgamated the Foster business into what had then become Reebok. We started off as Mercury, but we had to change our name. And that's a story in itself. And,
Yeah.
and the family came together. Father realized that we were doing okay. Our business, the new business was doing fine. So he was happy to let us get on with it. And, the family became somewhat reunited at that point.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good news. I'm glad to hear that. Joe, you mentioned national service a couple of times, and I don't have any. I'm from a different generation. I think most of my listeners are from a different generation. What was national service like for you?
Well, the first national service, you'd grown up in a family and everything goes normal. You've got your friends, you've got your social life with different people and this social unit. All of a sudden, you're taken off. You go away. You've got to start again in a way. So the people who are with you, people doing the same national service at the same time, these become your friends. And the whole thing changes. The whole routines change and the dynamics change. So you have to sit back and you start thinking, okay, well, we've got to make the best of this. This is an experience. And some people didn't make the best of it. Fortunately, both Jeff and myself, we enjoyed the difference. And when people say, oh, national service, did you enjoy it? Yes, we did, but we wouldn't do it again.
Okay.
So a one experience, good enough to have, do it again, but yes, we enjoyed it.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm wondering, like, with your grandfather's company, J.W. Foster, you sort of revolutionized athletic wear, right? The spike shoes and stuff that I read about. And I'm wondering, was your family famous when you were growing up? I mean, did people know who you were because of the name and the legacy, and just trying to get a sense of what that was like?
Within that community, yes, but that community was a small community. Okay. The biggest sports, say, in the United Kingdom at that time, the biggest one was football. Track and field, which grandfather grew up with. I say he grew up with track and field, but we have a letterhead from 1920, just in the 20. And at the side of the letterhead, there are 96 names of football teams and rugby teams. And that includes every football team in what is now the Premiership in the United Kingdom. And okay. I don't know how much you know about soccer, but people like Manchester United Arsenal, Chelsea, all the top teams, he was supplying them. And I didn't know that. Okay. It took a long while before we found that. It took a long while. We were well into Reebok, and it's only when Reebok we were growing, and we thought, why don't we look back on the history and let's find a bit of depth, what happened. And we found all these things. We found the advertising that he used to do, incredible advertising. Like, if you don't think that Fosters are the best running shoes you've ever worn, we'll give you £100. £100 in those days. Yeah. I mean, it's something like giving somebody £100,000 now. It's incredible the fact that somebody will give you £100. That's fantastic. And we're talking about the early 20th century. We're talking about in the first decade of the 20th century, and he's making these statements. So yeah, he was an influencer because he gave his shoes to athletes. So he was known very much in that circle, but not outside it. So you needed to be a footballer, a soccer player, to be famous. And we didn't have television. We didn't have computers. We didn't have mobile phones. So this is word of mouth. This is something that grows very slowly and is only known within its circle. So if it was today, and if he was doing what he did today, he would be very famous. I think he really would. We can say he invented the spike running shoe. Well, he got his idea from his grandfather. His grandfather used to repair, he was a cobbler, his grandfather, used to repair shoes, but he also repaired cricket boots. And in those days, we're going back to the 1880s, 1885. And in those days, cricket boots did have spikes in the bottom. And we assumed that my grandfather asked his grandfather, why have they got spikes in the bottom? To give them grip. When somebody's batting, bowling, or in the field, they need that grip. And that must have sparked the thought, because grandfather was part of the local athletics team, part of the local track team. And he thought, well, if I could put spikes in the bottom of running shoes, maybe that will improve my performance. It did. And it made him a business. And he made his first shoes in 1895. By the year 2000, he had a very good business, making for all the local athletic clubs.
Okay. By the year 1900.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. And you, when was it that you went back and discovered all of this? Was it, because that's fascinating that you weren't aware of it, growing up, but then you went back at some point and you were just amazed by all this. And someone's got to be really, 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 really sure about their product to offer a guarantee like you just like 100 pounds, like you mentioned. That's bold. That's confidence.
Absolutely. It reminds me a bit of Paul Feynman when we were doing tennis, and he put out an advert saying Reebok puts its balls on the line, and said, if you don't believe our tennis shoes are the best ever, we'll replace them and we'll give you a can of balls. A good ballsy advert, that that's good, and I'm sure that grandfather was just the same in what it was. And why did it take so long? For whatever reasons, I mentioned that going through 2 world wars maybe took my uncle and father into a different sphere, just survival, just survival, and so messages didn't come through. We didn't pick this up, and in fact, I employed one of our people to just go into the history. We sent him off to go through all these fiches and whatever, just look into the history of all these newspapers. And he dug out and dug out and dug out more. We just collected as much information as we could, and we found amazing stories. The Chariots of Fire, he made the shoes for the runners. Eric Liddell, Harold Abrahams, and Lord Burleigh, they were immortalised in this film, and my grandfather had made their shoes. It's incredible. What we found out was really incredible, and that history, we now bring it through to Reebok. We did bring it through to Reebok, and like that history now is 125 years of it, and there's a depth of it. I have a file which is about 4 inches thick of just copies of the advertising that my grandfather did. Not what we did. He did that way back there in the early 20th century. And so it's incredible. And we were fortunate. I mean, we may not have done the digging had Reebok had we not grown the business and thought, now we need to really find out more. And that allowed us to find out more, which was incredible.
Well, I'm glad you did the work, because that had to be really gratifying to find out that, do that work and find all that out, and inspirational as well. So you and Jeff decide to leave your dad and your uncle. You start as Mercury, you become Reebok, and then everything went perfectly, right? You just became the one of the biggest shoe companies in the world, right? It was easy. Is that what happened?
It would have been good if it could have happened that way. The journey was traumatic at times. We nearly went out of business at least on a couple of times. But it was always just keep going. It was always, we can get through this. I remember we were only 4 years into the business when Adidas, their lawyers, sent a letter to us, because we were using 2 stripes and a T-bar. that was our silhouette. And they were claiming that infringed the 3-stripe mark.
3-stripe.
And we got a cease. And, for 10 to 15 minutes, we thought, oh my God, what is this? And then we thought, just a minute. Adidas recognize that we're here. We're a challenge. Isn't that good? That's great. And that letter was pinned on the wall for a long, long time.
A different kind of inspiration.
Absolutely. We changed our name from Mercury to Reebok. We can change our silhouette. And we did. And it's the silhouette we see today, which is the Vector. So a lot of early lessons. And those lessons were, well, if you can't see your way through it, see your way around it. And if you can do that, you continue. You don't just fall on the floor and give up. That was never part of the journey. And getting into America, 1968, I first came to America to the NSGA show. The British government had decided they wanted people to export certainly the sports trade. So they were giving us a stand in the NSGA, National Sporting Goods Association. They would pay for a stand there. They would also pay our return airfares, and they'd pay half of our hotel bill if we would try to export. 1968, and I went across there, and it was incredible because the buyers they loved the product. They said, oh, we'd love some of this. Where do we buy it? And I'm giving them a credit card, England, a business card. It's in England. And they're looking and say, is that New England? No. and eventually we get, is England near London? Oh yeah, London. That's the England. But they're saying, well, when you get somebody over here to stock the shoes, and we can buy them locally within the States, we'd love to give it a try. Yeah. This is 1968. 1979, I got there. It was a long journey.
What did it take? So that's a 11-year period from the first time you were there. People are interested to actually being able to get the shoes to U.S. distribution, I guess, right?
Right, yeah. Well, we needed to get our own influence. It's how do you influence people in America, the runners in America. The good thing was that running during the 70s, it started late 60s, but running during the 70s really boomed, became an absolute massive business. Nike grew on the back of that business. And it was Runner's World. Runner's World was produced in California, and it was the Bible. Runner's World was a magazine, and it started off as a simple A4 page. By the time we got to the mid-70s, this was a full magazine, glossy, photographs, articles, an incredible magazine. And that was the influence. And they thought themselves so good at this because everybody read it. They decided to tell everybody which is the number one shoe. And I think the first number one shoe was a Nike. And but Phil Knight is buying his shoes in from Japan. He's importing. And the biggest problem is the issue of Runner's World comes out, gives Nike the number one spot. All of a sudden, you've probably got 200 million people would love a pair of Nike. Orders come flowing in. How do you cope? You don't. You can't get that sort of production overnight. It takes nearly a year to wind up to it. By that time, Runner's World are deciding there's another number one. It won't be the same one because things move on. That happened twice. And then the trade they must have rounded on Runner's World and said, look, this is ruining our business because by the time we get the product in that you say is number one, you're then having another shoe. Plus, the rest of the business is not selling any shoes. So it was a real mess. So what helped us is that they decided to change that into a star rating. So instead of being a number one 5-star ratings would be the best. And you could have 3 or 4 5-star shoes. Brilliant. I knew at that point I could make a 5-star shoe. I knew how to make a 5-star shoe. To get to number 1 meant a little bit of other things had to happen, but a 5-star shoe we could make. And we made Aztec. And so in 1979, we tested the shoes out at the Commonwealth Games in Edmonton. We got a shed load of medals, really good. So in February 1979, I have my shoe on the stand, NSGA show in Chicago. And along came out, and came out, what, 25,000 pairs. Wow, fantastic. But 25,000 pairs. Number one, we couldn't produce that ourselves. That sort of production was way outside our small factory, even in those days. But we'd allowed for that. We knew if we got a 5-star shoe, and in fact, running was really growing, we knew if we got there, we'd need help. And Bartow were willing to help. Bartow would make shoes for us. But then came out, wanted a better price. And yes, we knew that was coming as well, because production was moving to South Korea and where the prices were better. Phil Knight was bringing his in at a much better price than we could make in the UK. So we knew that. So that was great. The idea was good. But along came Paul Fireman. And Paul Fireman, he was CEO of Boston Camping, which is a small wholesale distributor in the outdoor trade. And I could tell he was a bit sort of, I wouldn't say unhappy, but he was a bit fed up of the same. For about 10 years, they've been doing the same thing with his brother. He worked with his brother and his brother-in-law. And I think they got to the point where he wanted a change. And so he said, Joe, love to be a distributor in America, but we need a 5-star shoe. So I said, Paul, come and have a look at this. Aztec. And he said, but it's not 5 stars. I said, well, I'm pretty sure it will be in August when the Runner's World magazine comes out, the shoe edition. Okay. So I went backwards and forwards. I met up with Kmart in Detroit, I think, their headquarters, and I met up with Paul Fireman and had a look at his operation. Boston Camping, nice. Met his brother and his brother-in-law. Thought, oh, this would be nice. And we got on together. There are people you can speak to, and this is fine. Kmart, it was such a big operation that we were talking to a small person who had to sell enough, say, meterage or footage within the organization. Otherwise, you don't get repeat orders. So I thought, it'd be nice to have this as a bolt-on business with Boston Camping. Paul is good, great. Last week in July, that's when the August issue comes out for Runner's World. I phoned Paul. Paul said, please go down, pick a magazine up at the kiosk and let's see how we did with our Aztec. It took him an hour before he came back. I said, Joe, said, Aztec, 5 stars, fantastic. I'm your distributor. Yeah. But he said, not only that, we had 2 other shoes in different categories. We had a racing shoe, a road racing shoe, that is, and a spike track shoe. And they too got 5 stars in Runner's World. So we had 3 5-star shoes. And that was the hook that we needed to get Reebok into America.
And was Paul going to start selling the shoes in his Boston Camping thing, or was it a totally new adventure for him as well to get the shoes into the U.S.? I'm not familiar with how that occurs, and probably most of the people listening aren't either. So how do you actually accomplish it with Paul?
Well, obviously, very shortly after gaining the 5 stars, I was on a plane. I was flying into Boston, picked up by Paul, taken to his office. And I said, where's Boston Camping? Oh, we decided to go our separate ways. Boston Camping had closed.
Okay. Oh, that. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Okay, Paul. So Paul, I'm Reebok. My brother, he's gone. I think he was making wallets then, snap wallets they call them, with Velcro, and that was Steve Feynman, and his brother-in-law. He just opened a second-hand car lot. So, okay, this was it. But at first I thought, it's good if we had a business there set up, which we could bolt onto, and that would sort of grow nicely. But no, Paul had decided, they'd all decided, go the separate ways. So Paul was very hungry. He needed it. And his concentration was there. But he also knew the American market, knew what to do. And the biggest initial problem, of course, was how do you finance it? Because he had some money. We were not big enough to be putting money into a rapid growth company. And we were lucky. I remember we had 2 or 3 people to visit that have or could have provided finance. And one was in the Empire State Building in New York. And I remember going up and meeting with the guy, with Paul. We told him the story. We said, we've got 5 stars and we're ready now, but we need some credit. We need some financing. And he said, well, look, a couple of years ago, a company called Nike came along and they wanted financing. And I couldn't see that they would really make it. So I turned them down. Mm. Oh, well, how about us? Well, he said, I don't think you're going to make it either. So I'm not going to finance you because I don't want to be known as the guy who financed the wrong company. And
wow. I guess that's one way to look at it. He already missed Nike, so he already has that.
That's right. That was incredible. And so we eventually ended up with Stephen Rubin. It was a British company. And he was doing the same as the guy in the Empire State Building. They were both sourcing companies. They worked in the Far East and they source product. They source footwear for companies. And Stephen, he wanted Paul to go to Sears, to go to all the big, we'll say, department stores and arrange with them that he could get shoes in those department stores, which would be far cheaper than what they could buy locally in the USA. So he wanted Paul to do that. Paul refused. We're Reebok. And we're going to only make Reebok and sell Reebok. And he did. And the company was going very nicely. Stephen, he gave a credit line and that helped him become part of the company. But really, Reebok didn't take off. It took off nicely. It was doing well. But it was a guy who was one of our technical reps. One of the technical reps for Paul, he was working in Los Angeles, Angel Martinez. And Angel Martinez, his wife, Frankie, was going to these classes and coming home full of it with the friends. This is great. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, well, they're aerobic classes. What's that? Oh, well, it's exercise to music. And we love it. Fantastic. So next time Frankie goes to one of these classes, Arnold goes as well. He sees an instructor wearing trainers, half the classes wearing trainers, and the rest, they're barefoot. An idea, why don't we make them a shoe specifically for women and for this, for aerobics? And off goes Arnold up to see Paul Feynman in Boston and said, Paul, this fantastic thing going on down in California, we've got to make some shoes for it. And Paul said, just a minute, hold on now. We're a running company. We're doing very nicely. We've got 5-star shoes and our business is expanding nicely. Now, what are we doing trying to play around make a few shoes for girls down there in Los Angeles? No, forget it. Arnold didn't forget it. He went to the back door to see Steve Liggett, who was in charge of production. He said to Steve, look, a simple shoe, white, glove leather upper, nice sponge sole on a woman's last. So it's narrow, it fits, and it's just specific. He got his wish. Steve produced 200 pairs for him. He gave them to the coaches and the instructors and a few of the best women down there. And that was it. They loved it so much. They didn't just go to the aerobics class for them. They wore them on the street. They wore them to work. They were so comfortable. And when you get Jane Fonda buying a pair and using them on her videos, wow, all of a sudden, that was it. Everybody wanted the aerobic shoe, freestyle. Everybody wanted it. We had trouble again at first because it's made from glove leather, and glove leather you can rip like a piece of paper. And I'm saying, no, we can't do that. But fortunately, we were doing volumes that the tanneries decided they could make it a little thicker, make it more like garment leather, and keep it soft. We wanted soft. Most shoes have they're harder, they're stiffer because they have a profile. You know, these shoes were soft and they would just drop down, and people were saying, well, you know, they don't look like shoes, they look like worn shoes. Great, because they were so soft, the people loved them. And that turned us into a $9 million company. But the year later, we're a $30 million company, then a $90 million company, a $300 million company, and a $900 million company. That happened in successive years. And at that point, it wasn't a matter of how do we build our business. It was a matter of how do we keep up with the demand. Right. So for 4 or 5 years, it was chasing, how do you keep up with the demand? And that's how Reebok became probably the fastest growing company at that time ever in America or even globally. And by 1989, we had overtaken Adidas, we've overtaken Nike, we became number one. Well, I think about 1987, became number one. I left in 1989 because we were a $4 billion company at that point. We had a bunch of accountants, a bunch of lawyers, and a lot of people in between who were used to churning out product. I put on about another 30 distributors around the world. I've been flying around the world at least 3 times every year. And I thought, this is probably time to go. We'd also been a sensation in Monte Carlo, in Monaco, though. We sponsored the event for Princess Grace charity, and all the people, so many came in from LA, from Hollywood stars. They were coming. Every year we'd have, even Frank Sinatra came to one of ours. So we had this incredible growth, and it had just gone street totally. We were fashion, but I thought, I've done so much. It's other people now running this company, and it's time for me to get out. So at the end of 1989, I retired.
So this is an amazing story, Joe, and I just want to make sure that I've got the time frame right for everybody. So if I'm understanding things correctly, from 1958 to 1979, the company sort of was successful, but just sort of prodded along. And then from 1979 to 1989, you just talked about that growth that was just exceptionally exponential. And I'm wondering, how did you and your brother, during that period from 58 to 79, and then 79 to, when you sold the company or when you left, how did you guys change, and how did you interact with, it's just amazing, you just the interaction with all of your employees, and then you were making everything in-house, and then you started, outsourcing and doing all these things. There had to be tremendous, obviously there was a tremendous success with that, but there had to be a lot of problems with that too. Like a lot of things that had to be addressed, and a lot of changes that maybe people weren't happy with.
Well, I guess this happens a little slower in a lot of companies.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have the time to take breath and to take things in, but we had a winning culture, and unfortunately, my brother died in 1980, just as we were starting.
Right.
And that created a big problem for me, because Jeff, he looked after production. He was the man, he looked after the factory. And he'd always said, Joe, you do the rest. And he loved the factory. He loved making shoes. so it was up to me to do the marketing, the whatever, which I did, the travel. But when Jeff died, just at that time when really he would have picked up a big amount of travel. He would have had to go and do this in the Far East to take our product, to go to the Far East and to work with them to develop it, and check the qualities, make sure. So that was difficult. And at the time, it was a decision then that it's better to put the American market closer to the product than the product to be sourced or worked on in the UK, go to Korea, and then into America. There were too many people in there. So I sent my people across to America to work with Paul Fireman. I sent them to work, design, and do whatever with Paul Fireman. So they had a direct connection with the manufacturing. That allowed the business to grow without me being in between it. My particular job at that time, I'd got it through to the 5-star shoe, where we had a winning shoe.
Okay.
And I got the distribution. The next was to grow the distribution around the world. So I started traveling. It took a couple of years for this to grow, but then I was traveling more or less all the time to different countries throughout Europe, putting distribution on, and then around the world to Australia. And so my role became growing. And in fact, we had the biggest and the best global distribution of any company. We were better than Nike, better than Adidas when it came to the expansion. But again, you do that when you've got a good product, and you do it when you've got a product in demand. And so it wasn't hard. I will say it wasn't easy, but it certainly wasn't hard. I wasn't trying to knock on the doors for 11 years, as I had done, to get into America, to get in that market. And now there were a lot of people wanting to see Reebok, Reebok. The important part of my job was to get the right people. With Paul Fireman, that was the right person. That was great. Now it was to do that globally, to go other people. And we grew. We were very soon at $1 billion globally. And I think in the USA, we were just over $1 billion. So we were soon at $2.5–3 billion. And a lot of this was the global market.
And so you're like an overnight success after 20 years. One of those. Yes.
That's right.
And that change that you described, where you're traveling all over the world and stuff, I'm thinking that, you probably start to become famous, or at least in some circles, right? Because you're founder of Reebok, right? And Reebok's taking off and you're traveling the world. People want Reebok. There's, Jane Fonda wearing Reebok is like Oprah saying wear Reebok today. Right? I would think it's like a huge thing. So that had to bring you tremendous exposure, but also it sounds like it also, was tough on your life. So it's, your life changed because you had to change to accommodate the growth of the business. Do I have that right?
Well, you have to. It's you can't stop and say, just a minute, where am I? The minute you stop and say, where am I? Everything's gone past you.
Okay.
You have to take it and run with it. It becomes your life. And it had been my passion from the beginning. And so you have to continue with that passion. And I think it's the same when producing or finding distribution. You have to make sure that the people you go with take that passion on board. We have a winning culture. This is something that grows within the company. Take the right people on, the people who also have that passion. It's nice to take on a good businessman, but if they've not got the passion, the business can soon drift away. Yes. And so I believe that passion is absolutely essential to a successful company. I think about 3 times a year we bring together all the distributors, and so they would all meet it from the different countries. And those meetings were absolutely incredible because people got on just like a house on fire. Brilliant. It was, everybody loved meeting. So everybody talked to each other. And I think that that's one of the reasons that the brand did so well. And in America, it was, again, having the right people. And it's not difficult to get the right people when things are going well, when it's growing, when it's really well, when you've got that pull, everything's happening for your company. But again, it's employ talent, which is better than your talent. It's no good. Like say, if you're the cleverest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And those are the sort of things. It's a matter of getting people in who can do a job better than you do. But again, it's good to employ talent, but not egos. We did get one or two egos in there, and you soon find that they're the people that don't fit. And because you've got to become absorbed by Reebok. It's like, did I become famous? That wasn't the intention for me to become famous. It was always Reebok was the most important thing, because you need the brand, and it's got to be Reebok. So every time it's Reebok. I just work for Reebok. It's as simple as that. Yeah, Reebok is the master or the mistress, whichever way you want it.
And Joe, when you stepped away in 1989, was there? You mentioned, that the business was changing. Of course, probably had to in order for it to run at $1 billion level. And you mentioned, you got it to the point where you created multiple 5-star shoes, which is quite an accomplishment, right? So I'm thinking to myself, was there a particular thing that happened that made you want to make the decision to step away, or what happened, and then how did you feel? Because I think a lot of us, when we sell a business and step away, that's been, it's such a part of our identity that sometimes it's a little tough to know who you are and what to do afterwards. And someone that's had your level of success, I'm wondering whether you dealt with that or how you dealt with it.
Well, I somewhat wanted to step back a little bit. I wanted to be, we can be quiet. We can enjoy the scenery instead of passing it by. You can go to all these countries, visit everything. But, I was at 35,000 feet. I was visiting countries, being picked up at the airport in a limousine, going down to the best hotel, staying there, and then going out in the evenings to the nicest, best restaurants. So everything was sort of laid out. Brilliant, fantastic. But you think, I come from the north of England, and it's pretty nice to just walk into a fish and chip shop and just have fish and chips.
Just be left alone. Yeah, sure.
It's just something, whatever it is, wherever you are. Have a clam bake. Something simple. And so I think I was ready for doing something simple and just lying back and enjoying life. I could do that for quite some time, but like you say, do you ever leave? No. It's a bit like the Eagles in Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave.
You can never leave. Yeah.
and that was it. The phone would ring 2 months, 3 months in. Joe, what happened here? And this happened so much that, did I ever leave? No, not really. And the passion remains. I don't care. I don't know where you were born, but you probably had a local basketball team or the local base, and you move away maybe, and maybe the team, it's not that good. But every time, every week, you look at the results. You got to go back to that team.
Sure.
It's home. Whether it's the best in the world or not, and you're disappointed when they lose, and you really, that's great, we won. We won this week. And so, you still have that. You still go back to the basic. And for me, it's in the northwest of England, at Bolton Wanderers. They're a good, famous team back in the 20s. Maybe when my grandfather was making shoes for them. They were famous. So things have moved on. And for me, can I relax? Can I get away from this and enjoy maybe family life? And to an extent, it happened. But, things move on. Not everything is good. And I eventually ended up with a divorce, maybe because my wife, in those early days, we couldn't afford to travel together. But as we grew, I sort of look, you can come anytime now, because I needed that. I suppose I needed somebody who I could relate to. Being at 35,000 feet on your own on a flight, doing these things. Okay. So I went to Monte Carlo. So I went into the palace and shared a glass of champagne with Prince Rainier. I did those things, but we didn't do it. I did it. Mm-hmm. And so there is a need to share. And after all this, whatever you do, if you're not sharing something, where's the value? So for me, the value of doing this and doing it alone, no, that lost its shine. It was better to relax. And I've enjoyed everything that we've done with Reebok since and now. And even now, Reebok is now up for sale. It became part of Adidas.
Right. Yeah. I thought that I was going to mention that because I was thinking back to the letter you said that you hung up, from that they were saying you can't use our trademark, right? And then they end up buying the company many, many years later.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, I think the biggest problem is that I was either very lucky or something happened and I managed to find Paul Fireman, right, and then Stephen Rubin. So these were people. Paul and Stephen were at each other's throats. I don't say they didn't like each other. They just had that sort of tension. But it was a good thing because we used to look at Stephen and we used to say, Stephen's a bit like, that piece of grit that gets into an oyster and it turns out to be a pearl.
Makes a pearl, yeah.
And he was that piece of grit. So there was that dynamic, that sort of pressure almost to make it happen. And the biggest problem is that, okay, those guys were running the company, but Paul, he must have, he reached the point where, would you take it from here? Yeah, he'd run very hard to keep up with the demand. But I think once the demand sort of settled down and you've got to start thinking of where do we go next? How do we expand this company? I don't think Paul really, I won't say was capable of doing it. I just don't think it was his area.
Yeah, it wasn't what he wanted to do. It wasn't what made him excited about getting up or whatever.
That's right. And he tried. We must have had 10, 15 different CEOs, but he didn't find the right man. That, I think, is part of what Paul regrets. He didn't find the right man. And eventually it was sold to Adidas. Had he found the right man, Adidas had found Herbert Heine. Had Paul Fireman found Herbert Heine, maybe the story was different. There was a point, I think it was late in the 80s, maybe in the early 90s, when Reebok were almost ready to buy Adidas. They could have done. It was.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. Oh. There was if you read, what is it now? It's Pitch Invasion. It's the Adidas story by, what's the name of the woman? Barbara Schmidt. My assistant here knows all the answers, you see. Julie knows all the
I can see.
Barbara Schmidt, Pitch Invasion. And you'll find that Stephen Rubin, who was, of course, part of Reebok at that time, had the option to buy Adidas. And Adidas was waiting for the call, and he never called. But I think Stephen Rubin knew he was good at financing. But I don't think he ever thought that he could run a successful company. Reebok needed Paul. Adidas needed Heine. And Stephen Rubin, who's very close to Adidas right now, because I think he's the major purchaser of their product for the UK. So there is, but he could have bought them. And I think now it's up to Adidas to do the right thing for Reebok, to sell to the right people. Reebok have gone from what was nearly a $4 billion company to a revenue of just over $1 billion, whilst Adidas have been there. And you can't blame Adidas. They paid nearly $4 billion for the company. If you do that, you're entitled to do what you want. You bought the company. And they didn't buy it for Reebok's sake. They bought it to give Adidas more momentum, which it did. It helped. So Adidas got momentum. I mean, it wasn't just buying Reebok that did it. There's other things that were there, but that's what happened. And the story was out there that Adidas and Reebok together would be competition for Nike. I mean, I guess that's what they told people. But the reality was that that Reebok, they took lots of the assets for Reebok. And I say, you can't blame Adidas for that. You paid your money. But now I hope Adidas have the respect for the Reebok brand to allow it to go to somebody who is ready to spend the time, the energy, and the money. And I would think if they're now, if the revenues are now 1.5, given 3 years, they could be back up to 5 billion. And at that point, you make it a public company again. And that way, you know, it can grow. There's room at the top. You know, people say, no, can't. You know, Adidas and Nike are there. No, nothing. Reebok can't get back again. Why not? We've been number one. Why not? And I think if you've got the enthusiasm, because now these companies are fashion companies. You know, no longer is this a sports business. It's sports driven, but it's fashion. It's everybody now is out there. Well, where's the next? Maybe the next sort of bit of science or whatever. You know, is there anything? And having written the book, I'm now being sort of in contact. A lot of people in contact with me. Brilliant ideas. Why, you know, I can't say anything about that, but the possibility of making these moves is there. And it starts with a 14-year-old child, you know, has an idea.
Right.
Yeah. So there are things out there. And I think Reebok has a good opportunity if they get the right people to come back again. And hopefully my book will help. It's out there, and it's through the book that so many people who have read it now are coming and saying, wow, yes, didn't know that. Didn't know that happened to Reebok. Yeah, great to know that story, that backstory. And yeah, I think I do about 3 or 4 Zoom meetings a week, and some with schools. And we even get the schools to send in some ideas, some drawings for, you know, what do they think a Reebok shoe should look like? Wow. And, you know, it's amazing. So anybody out there who wants to start up a company and be an entrepreneur, be young, start young, because that's when you're fearless. Jeff and I, 23, 25, fearless.
Right. Nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose, right?
In fact, it was everything to gain because we were losing it. We were losing it as the parent company. So everything to gain. And if you have a failure, so what? You know, you're young enough, you pick up, that's a lesson. We learned from that. You know, and I had a lot of lessons getting into America, a lot of lessons. But, you know, that's the future for Reebok as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I hope that's the future that comes along too, because it sounds like it would make you very happy, and it sounds like it's what the company is destined to be. It sounds like it's had a meteoric rise, then maybe with Adidas had kind of a little slump, and now it's ready to come back and make you proud of what you started. It's amazing.
Yes, that would be fantastic. Well, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it will be fantastic. Yeah, yeah, it is that positive. You've got to have that positive feel. If you, again, as an entrepreneur, must think positively. And every day is not a good day, but if you get up and think that, then that's wrong. Every day has got to be a good day. And you've got to be on the right side of it. You know, the glass is half full, not half empty. Right. Everything is there and it's up to you. And face the challenges.
Well, Joe, it's been amazing to spend this time with you. I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity. And as Joe referenced his book a couple of times, it's called Shoemaker, Reebok, and the Untold Story of a Lancashire Family Who Changed the World. And as you heard today, that's not too bold of a claim to make in the subtitle. So if you've heard a little bit of the story now, pick up Joe's book and read the rest of the story. Joe, is there anything else that you want people to know about you or your book, or how to contact you or whatever?
Well, we can say that on the 10th of June, the paperback of my book is out and it's available in Amazon. You can also get to our webpage, which is jwfosterheritage.com. And if you want a signed copy, you can sign up for a signed copy, and we do that for you.
Wonderful.
So, either way, but the paperback is out on the 10th of June. And I don't know if it's available in America at the same time. It should be. So, we're looking forward to bigger and better sales. And we want it to be number one. That's our journey right now. Our journey, get Shoemaker to a number one bestseller. And if we can do that, maybe it'll help Reebok get back to that number one position again.
Well, that's a perfect way to end, and we'll do what we can to help get that book to number one, Joe. Thank you so much for being on the show. This has been such an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It's been great to talk to you, and good luck with yours. Is Happen the name of the podcast?
How did it happen? Yep.
How did it happen? Yes. How did it happen? Every success with that.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did It Happen podcast.